All right. Hey guys, what's up? This is Unit 5, Lesson 3, Part 2. We are talking about the 1920s Republican presidents. All three of them are Republicans, by the way. And this is going to be our lecture over Calvin Too Cool for School Coolidge and Mr. Herbert Hoover, president when the stock market crashes. And I have my friend Amelia here because we will be discussing raccoons, and she is almost a raccoon. She's very close. Remember that the first 1920s Republican president, Warren G. Harding, had a lot of scandals. Now, he wasn't personally involved in these, but he really trusted his friends. He came from Ohio, so we called him the Ohio Gang, like way too much. So this was like where the Secretary of the Interior, Albert Fall, actually sold off government land with oil under it in Teapot Dome, Wyoming, for a $500,000 bribe to a private oil company. And you can see in this political cartoon, it's great, right? You see all of these important government things like our Navy and the White House and the Washington Monument, the Capitol building where Congress meets, the US Army. All of these government things are being sold off. So it's like making fun of the fact that Albert Fall like sold off government stuff. Like he's just selling off the government stuff for his own private usage. Not okay. And he will be the first cabinet secretary ever to go to jail for his misdeeds. Now, Warren G. Harding is going to die just 2 years into office from that stomach bug, right? In California while he was on tour there. And so when a president dies, it is, of course, the vice president who must assume the job, and that is Calvin Coolidge. He was the governor of Massachusetts who rose to fame and became Harding's vice president in 1920 because he put down a labor strike by the Boston Police Union using the state guard. So he is not a man to really like unions. And in fact, most of these 1920s Republican presidents, they're not going to be a friend to labor. They're in fact going to do a lot to kind of curtail or push down the rights of workers and unions during this time in the 1920s. Coolidge was a man of very few words. His nicknames, I call him Too Cool for School Coolidge, but you might also hear him called Silent Cal, because again, he doesn't say a whole lot. Unlike Arthur back there, if you can hear him whining. So there was a famous story about a White House gathering where a dinner guest sitting next to President Coolidge had basically made a bet with him saying, I bet I can get you to say more than 3 words, Mr. Coolidge. And he turned to her and said, you lose. So that should give you some indication of the type of man that Coolidge is. But compared to all the scandals, like the personal sex scandals and the political scandals under Harding and the tragic early death, like maybe the country needed somebody boring like Coolidge. And I mean, this man, he doesn't believe in doing a whole lot. He is the laissez-faire president, or laissez-faire, because remember, this means, sorry, my little raccoon. This means the hands-off approach, okay? Government is going to let business do what it wants. Coolidge totally believes in that. There is a famous quote by Coolidge you need to know. You should probably highlight it right here. The business of America is business, and he believes in keeping the government out of its way. So big business in the 1920s is doing real good. It's roaring, right? And Harding and Coolidge's policies, and also to an extent Herbert Hoover's, the next president, they're all about letting business do its thing. So no regulations, no government rules on business. They're going to also have big tariffs to basically protect American businesses and industry and make it harder for other countries to do trade with us. At a time when the world probably needed some peace and world trade, that was part of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, we ain't going to be doing it, okay? So tariffs, no regulations, and you're going to have a decrease in taxes. This is what we call tax cuts, particularly on businesses and the wealthy. this is the start of what we term trickle-down economic theory, that the more money the rich have, the wealthier the country will be, because the rich are typically the ones who own businesses. And so if they have extra money, they can invest it and grow their business, which means hiring more workers typically. And that will help the middle class and the poor, and eventually everybody will be lifted up. So the money trickles down from the top, the wealthiest, to the bottom, the poorest. Now, obviously, there are a lot of flaws in this way of thinking, and you don't have to take my word for it because we're studying history. Remember that everything in the 1920s that we're talking about is going to lead to this thing called the stock market crash. And then a few years later, we'll be in this really big thing called the Great Depression. So it's partly the responsibility of the government to check business and to check unregulated investments, like in Wall Street, in the stock market. These were things that Coolidge was unwilling to do because he was laissez-faire. Oh, and while you're reading this exciting chart right here, I also wanted to point out why I brought my little Amelia little bear in here. Coolidge was really a boring dude, but his wife was pretty awesome, actually. Grace Coolidge really loved animals, and Coolidge himself, he was kind of an animal lover. He loved to horseback ride. And he and his wife, they adopted like a whole menagerie of animals that they kept at the White House. And everybody around the world knew that the Coolidges loved animals, so they were donated as gifts of states, all sorts of rare exotic animals as well. So the Coolidges had a myriad of dogs and cats. They had sheep grazing the lawn of the White House, just like Wilson had during the war. And then they had ponies at the White House, horses at the White House. Coolidge actually had a robotic horse powered by electricity he had installed in the White House that he used for his daily exercising until everybody made such merciless fun of him that he stopped doing that. And they were gifted from several African kingdoms a pair of baby lion cubs, which I think he named like tax cuts and bureaucratic nonsense or something stupid like that. And they were also given a baby pygmy hippo, which is the most adorable little thing you can imagine. Do I have a picture of it? Oh man, I don't think I do. Where's my baby pygmy hippo? Anyway, it's like a miniature baby hippo. Like you can hold it in your arms. It's so cute. Um, and then my favorite animal that the Coolidges had was for Thanksgiving. Apparently, it was an old tradition in the South, not like Texas South, but like them deep South places like Mississippi, Alabama. Okay, that they like to eat raccoon for Thanksgiving. I'm filming this a few days before Thanksgiving anyway, so I'm just imagining a raccoon platter on the table. And so the South like gifted the Coolidges this live raccoon. And very famously, Calvin Coolidge pardoned the raccoon because he did not want to eat raccoon meat. And also his wife, Grace, was like horrified. She's like, "You're not going to have that raccoon slaughtered and we're not going to eat that." So they basically kept this raccoon that he pardoned as a pet at the White House. And the Secret Service were very upset because the raccoon apparently would like go and tear up all the furniture at the White House and would be zooming around and being a general menace, the little trash pandas that they are. But Grace named the raccoon Rebecca, Rebecca the raccoon, and Coolidge, who hated talking to the press, and the press hated him for being so taciturn and quiet. At his funeral, Calvin Coolidge's funeral, the press reporters, they famously said something like, pointing to his coffin, "How can anybody tell the difference?" Like basically, the man was already dead when he was alive. So anyway, when he had to go and suffer talking to the press and answering questions, which he usually answered only with like yes or no, Coolidge would usually have Rebecca around his shoulders, this raccoon. So he would answer the press with the raccoon there. But it's not so funny talking about Calvin Coolidge because again, he is big business. He is laissez-faire, and even though while he's president, the times were flowing, things were going really good for big business and for the rising middle class and especially the wealthy in America in the 1920s, the Roaring '20s. This is all going to come crumbling down because he did nothing to uncheck this extreme over speculation, the rampant investments and everything else that was taking place. So You could see both Coolidge and Harding, the president he replaced, who died. They are both conservative. They both are pro big business. They're favoring big business. They're both laissez-faire. Okay. They're going to promote deregulation, which again means lifting government rules placed on businesses, allowing business more freedom to operate as it wants, um, and assigning business leaders to key government positions. I think Coolidge was a big, what do you call it, muse or something for Donald Trump. He definitely aspired to be like Coolidge. That was one of the presidents that Trump admired. And there you can see in this cartoon, here's like a 1920s dance craze doing the Lindy, the Charleston, those kind of 1920s jazz dances. Remember, jazz is the music of the 1920s. It's another reason why it's called the Roaring Twenties. It's sometimes called the Jazz Age. But here's President Calvin Coolidge playing a typical jazz instrument, a saxophone, and he's playing this jazz music to this big, pretty lady there who represents big business. So basically, Coolidge was music to the ears of big business. They really liked his deregulation, his laissez-faire attitude, because they got to do whatever they wanted. And you can imagine the opinion of the cartoonist, the way he draws big business is kind of ugly, okay? That they're not a fan of this unchecked big business throwaway, basically. And here's business again singing, "What a friend we have in Coolidge." Big business really likes what Coolidge is doing for them. Talking about the tax cuts that were taking place, you could see in this chart here, it says, how did tax rates change for top income earners in the 1920s? Well, those who are making the most amount of money because of the 16th Amendment, the graduated income tax, typically would have to pay more. And you could see that at the beginning of the decade in 1921, they're paying 73% of their income each year in taxes, which is a fair amount. And then you can see over time, 1922, 23, okay, as it goes through to the end of the decade in 1929, when Hoover is president, when the stock market will crash, the percentage of taxable income, the tax rate that the richest people have to pay, it goes down. It goes way down throughout the 20s. That's part of the Republican conservative political movement for tax cuts, promoting big business, and again, that idea of trickle down economic theory. So Hoover had been the Secretary of Commerce, that's like business, under Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge. And when Coolidge announced that he wasn't going to run again, because remember, Coolidge had served out the rest of Harding's term and then his own 4 years, Hoover was the natural choice. In the 1928 election, he beat the Democrat Al Smith. And that's kind of important because Al Smith from New York was the first Catholic ever to run for president. And there was enormous nativism and racism, and I don't know what you call discrimination against Catholics specifically, but he had that going on. Remember in the 1920s, the pushback against immigration had led to restrictions such as the National Origins Act. And so it was partly because of this nativism in American society, Hoover's going to overwhelmingly be elected in 1928. And he's carrying on the Roaring Twenties, big business, laissez-faire policies that we'd seen from like Coolidge and, for 2 years under Harding. So it seemed like the Roaring Twenties is just going to keep roaring. Hoover was a rags to riches story. He was born out on kind of the frontier in the 1800s, and he was one of the first to ever get a scholarship to a new engineering school out in California called Stanford. Sorry. And he will actually become a millionaire by the time he's not even 30 through his mineral engineering all over the world. But basically, Hoover was a great philanthropist. During World War I, he donated a lot of his own wealth to basically help provide food for the starving masses of civilians that were displaced from the war over in Europe. So he's a good guy, but he truly did believe that through hard work, anybody could achieve anything. He'd been born like in a shack. His parents, dead by the time he was a teenager. He was left to fend for himself and for all of his younger siblings. through his own hard work and dedication. Like I said, he's a scholarship kid. He was able to make it rich. He believed in the American dream. That's what he called this idea of rugged individualism. The idea that in America you can make it big. All you have to do is just work hard enough. It was a saying at this time that somebody, if they want to lift themselves out of poverty, if they need to work hard, they just lift themselves up by their own bootstraps. Okay, you lift yourself up by working hard, and that's very true. Except for what's going to happen in this Great Depression, you won't be able to work your way out of it. You won't be able to work harder and make yourself better and improve your life when there are no jobs to be had. And that is something that Hoover and the other Republican presidents of the 1920s just didn't get. They did not understand. And in 1929, on October 29th, 1929, that's called Black Tuesday, the stock market is going to crash. And it's not like America's immediately going to be thrown into this Great Depression. That'll take several years, but the fault lines had already been drawn. Problems occurring as back as World War I are basically leading up to this moment. Farmers overproducing, farm prices on all crops going down. Farmers were one of the first ones hit. Overproduction in manufacturing. You'll see a loss of sales from 1926 onward, even with the automotive industry. You're going to see also from the Treaty of Versailles enormous reparations, that war debt causing a sick cycle of debts and repayments in all of these countries, which all owed America, which we're not getting that money back. You're also going to see problems with tariffs. The Hawley-Smoot tariff, signed into law by Herbert Hoover in 1930, is going to basically strangle world trade at a time we needed trade more than ever. All these problems were amplified by the fact that our governments, these three Republican presidents in the 1920s, did nothing to stop the rampant, flow of people buying and selling stocks and investments and things that they shouldn't have been doing. Banks making out loans that they shouldn't have been giving. There was no government rules or regulations because remember, this was an era of deregulation. And so they were free to do as they pleased, and it's going to lead to this really bad time when we're going to see at its height about a third of Americans unemployed, another half of Americans living on reduced wages, people starving, children starving, the birth rate at its lowest the country had ever seen, the suicide rate at its highest. That will be the Great Depression, even worse than, believe it or not, even worse than right now under what we're going through with COVID. It was definitely worse than the Great Depression. Now, because Hoover is going to be president in 1929 when the stock market crashes, like I said, he goes down in the history books as one of the worst presidents because he was president when the stock market crashed on October 29th, 1929. We'll talk more about Hoover and his Reconstruction Finance Corporation and what he tries to do or doesn't do later on in our next unit on the Great Depression and the New Deal. But for now, that is the end of the 1920s. And I'll leave you with these pictures about the stock market crash and think about what is to come. Thank you, guys. I'll talk to you later. Don't forget to do your summary. Answer that essential question. All right, peace.